The conference room went silent as Trent Callahan slammed the printed report onto the table so hard my coffee cup rattled. "You jeopardized everything, Laurel," he said, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. Everyone around the table froze. My coworkers suddenly found their laptops fascinating. Nobody would look at me. My chest tightened as Trent leaned forward, his face inches from mine. "You've become a liability." The words hit me like a punch. I opened my mouth to respond, but nothing came out. He straightened up, smoothing his tie with deliberate calm. "One more mistake like this," he said slowly, making sure everyone heard, "and I will personally blacklist you from every consulting firm in this industry." The room tilted. My hands trembled under the table. Before I could process what was happening, Sharon from HR appeared in the doorway holding a manila folder. She walked over and placed it in front of me, without meeting my eyes. "You're being placed under review," she said quietly. The words echoed in my head. Review. Blacklist. Liability. I sat there, frozen, as Trent walked out without another word. If you're watching this video, please like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching my revenge story from. I want to know how far it has traveled. My name is Laurel Briggs, and until 3 hours ago, I believed my career was solid. I'm 32 years old, white, American, and I've spent the last 5 years at Callahan Consulting Group carrying projects that should have broken me. I'm the person who arrives first and leaves last. The one who fixes everyone's mistakes without asking for credit. Trent himself once told me I was the backbone of this division. He said it during my performance review last year, right before he promised me a promotion that never came. But that didn't matter to me then. I loved the work. I believed in doing things right. I trusted that dedication would be rewarded eventually. Now, sitting in this silent conference room with everyone pretending I didn't exist, I realized how foolish that trust had been. Sharon cleared her throat. "Laurel, we need to discuss some concerns about your recent performance." I finally found my voice. "What concerns?" She glanced toward the door where Trent had disappeared. "There have been reports of missed deadlines and communication issues." I felt something cold settle in my chest. "That's not true." Sharon slid the folder toward me. "These are the incidents we've documented." I opened it with shaking hands. Inside were printed emails, project notes, and performance complaints. All of them painted me as careless, unprofessional, and incompetent. My stomach dropped as I recognized the dates. These weren't random incidents. They were specific moments over the past month when I had pushed back on Trent's decisions. When I had refused to compromise on compliance standards. When I had questioned his shortcuts. Someone had been building a case against me, carefully, deliberately. And that someone was my own director. I looked up at Sharon. "This is retaliation." She shifted uncomfortably. "We're simply following procedure." The meeting ended with me being told to take the rest of the day off while HR completed their review. I gathered my things in a daze, feeling dozens of eyes watching me leave. Outside in the parking lot, I sat in my car and stared at the building. My phone buzzed. A text from Marcus, one of the junior analysts. "What happened in there?" "Everyone's talking." I didn't reply. I couldn't explain what I didn't fully understand yet. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. This wasn't over. 2 months earlier, everything had been different. I was sitting at my desk on a Tuesday morning, reviewing contract documents for our biggest client, Westbridge Industries. It was routine work, the kind I'd done hundreds of times. But something caught my eye. A compliance clause that hadn't been properly verified. It was buried deep in the paperwork, easy to miss if you weren't paying attention. But I was always paying attention. The clause dealt with environmental regulations for a manufacturing facility Westbridge was acquiring. According to the contract, all permits and certifications were current and valid. But when I cross-referenced the documentation with a state regulatory database, nothing matched up. The permits listed didn't exist. Someone had either fabricated the information or failed to verify it properly. Either way, if we signed off on this deal without catching the error, Westbridge could face millions in fines. Worse, our firm could be held liable for negligence. I immediately printed everything and walked to Trent's office. He was on the phone but waved me in. I waited while he finished his call, my heart pounding. This was serious. When he hung up, I placed the documents on his desk. We have a problem with the Westbridge contract. Trent barely glanced at the papers. What kind of problem? I explained the permit discrepancy, showing him the documentation gaps. He listened with an expression I couldn't quite read. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. So you're saying the deal can't close? Not until we verify the actual permit status, I said. If these documents are falsified, we need to flag it immediately. We could be looking at fraud. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he picked up his phone and made a call. Yeah, it's me. We might have a situation with Westbridge. He paused, listening. No, just a compliance thing. I'll handle it. He hung up and looked at me. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to sign off on the contract as is. I blinked. I can't do that. Sure you can. It's a minor administrative oversight. The client confirmed everything is legitimate. Then they should be able to provide the actual permits, I said, keeping my voice steady. Laurel. His tone shifted, becoming harder. This deal is worth $8 million. The client is already frustrated with our timeline. We're not going to blow this over paperwork. It's not just paperwork. It's the law. Trent stood up, and I realized how carefully he was controlling his anger. I need you to be a team player here. I am being a team player, I said. I'm protecting the firm from legal liability. He walked around his desk until he was standing directly in front of me. Let me be very clear. Victor in sales already promised the client this would be wrapped up by Friday. If you refuse to sign off, you're going to make us look incompetent. I felt my pulse quicken. Victor promised something without proper verification? Victor is bringing in millions in revenue. You're a reviewer. Your job is to review and approve, not create problems. The words stung, but I held my ground. My job is to ensure compliance. And right now, this contract isn't compliant. Trent's jaw tightened. Think very carefully about what you're saying no to. I met his eyes. I'm saying no to breaking the law. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then he picked up the documents and dropped them back on his desk. Get out of my office. I left, my hands shaking. Back at my desk, I stared at my computer screen without seeing it. I had just refused a direct order from my director. I knew there would be consequences. I just didn't know how severe they would be. The retaliation started immediately, though it was subtle at first. The next morning, I arrived to find I'd been removed from the Westbridge project email chain. When I asked Trent's assistant about it, she said there had been a restructuring, and I was no longer needed on that particular deal. That afternoon, I was excluded from our weekly strategy meeting. No explanation, no email, just my name missing from the calendar invite. By the end of the week, my access to certain client files had been restricted. I reached out to IT, who told me the changes came directly from Trent's office. I tried to focus on my other projects, but the isolation was deliberate and obvious. Coworkers who used to stop by my desk suddenly seemed busy whenever I approached. The analysts I had trained and mentored started avoiding eye contact in the hallways. Marcus caught me by the elevator one evening. He glanced around before speaking quietly. People are saying you're difficult to work with. Who's saying that? I asked. He looked uncomfortable. Trent mentioned it in the leadership meeting. He said you've been resistant to feedback and creating unnecessary delays on projects. My stomach dropped. That's not true. I know, Marcus said quickly. But he's the director. People believe him. A week later, the first formal complaint appeared. Trent called a team meeting to discuss missed deadlines and accountability. He didn't name me directly, but everyone knew who he was talking about. We had a situation last week where a reviewer failed to complete their sign-off on time, he said, standing at the front of the conference room. This created delays with a major client and damaged our reputation. I felt every eye in the room shift toward me. The deadline was extended by the client, I said, my voice steady. There was no delay. Trent's expression didn't change. The extension was requested because of your failure to complete the work on schedule. That's not what happened. Are you calling me a liar, Laurel? The room went completely silent. I realized the trap too late. If I backed down, I was admitting fault. If I pushed back, I was being insubordinate. I chose my words carefully. I'm saying there may be a misunderstanding about the timeline. Trent smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Let's discuss this in my office after the meeting. I knew then that he wasn't trying to resolve anything. He was building a narrative. And I was the villain in his story. That evening, I sat in my apartment staring at my laptop screen. I had pulled up every email, every document, every project file from the past 3 months. I organized everything chronologically, cross-referencing dates and decisions. What I found made my blood run cold. Every mistake Trent had accused me of could be traced back to moments when I had questioned his judgment or pushed back on compliance issues. The missed deadline was actually a project he had reassigned to me at the last minute with an impossible turnaround time. The communication issues were emails he had deliberately excluded me from, then blamed me for not knowing about. The quality concerns were related to work he had rushed through approval over my objections. It was a pattern, a deliberate, calculated pattern of setting me up to fail. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Be careful. He's done this before. I stared at the message, my heart racing. Before I could respond, another text came through. Check the HR records for Nina Valdez. She was before your time. I immediately searched our company directory. Nina Valdez had worked at the firm 4 years ago. Her LinkedIn showed she'd left abruptly and hadn't worked in consulting since. I found her contact information and sent a careful message explaining who I was. Nina responded the next morning. We agreed to meet for coffee that weekend. When I arrived at the cafe, she was already there, a petite woman in her 40s with tired eyes. You're going through it right now, aren't you? She said as I sat down. How did you know? Because Trent uses the same playbook every time. She told me her story. She had been a senior analyst who had discovered Trent was inflating billable hours on client projects. When she reported it to him privately, he thanked her and promised to fix it. 2 weeks later, she was being written up for performance issues. Within a month, she was placed on a performance improvement plan. By month 2, she was fired. I tried to fight it, Nina said. But he had documentation. Emails, complaints from coworkers, missed deadlines. All of it looked legitimate on paper. But it wasn't. It was real, but it was manufactured. He set up impossible situations, then documented my failures. By the time I realized what was happening, it was too late. She leaned forward. Here's what you need to know. Trent is protected. He brings in major revenue for the firm. Management won't touch him unless you have undeniable proof of wrongdoing. What kind of proof? She smiled grimly. The kind that shows a pattern. One person's complaint is dismissed as disgruntled. Multiple people's complaints become a liability. I started keeping detailed records of everything. Every email was saved to a personal folder with timestamps. Every conversation was followed up with a written summary that I sent to myself. Every project deadline, every assignment, every interaction was documented. I also started reaching out quietly to other people who had worked with Trent. I was careful, professional, just asking general questions about their experiences. What I discovered was damning. 3 other employees had left the firm under similar circumstances over the past 6 years. All had been high performers who had questioned Trent's decisions. All had been systematically pushed out. But I needed more than stories. I needed evidence that would hold up under scrutiny. That's when I remembered the Westbridge contract. The original documents had been filed in our project archive system. I pulled them up and compared them to the final signed version. The permit section had been modified. Someone had added language, suggesting the verification had been completed, even though it hadn't. And the person who had made the changes was listed in the document metadata. Trent Callahan. I took screenshots of everything, backed them up to 3 different locations, and kept working. I knew the confrontation was coming. I just needed to be ready. The formal HR meeting happened on a Wednesday. I was called in without warning and found Trent already sitting there with Sharon and another HR representative I didn't recognize. Laurel, we need to discuss some ongoing performance concerns, Sharon began. I pulled out a folder I'd been carrying with me everywhere for the past 2 weeks. Before we start, I'd like to address some concerns of my own. Trent shifted in his seat. This meeting is about your performance, not mine. Actually, I said calmly, it's about accuracy. I opened the folder and pulled out printed timelines showing every project deadline, every reassignment, every email chain where I'd been excluded from critical communications. I showed them the documentation of changed project requirements with impossible turnaround times. I presented the metadata from the Westbridge contract showing unauthorized modifications. Sharon's eyes widened as she reviewed the documents. The other HR representative started taking notes. Trent's face had gone red. This is a fantasy, he said. You're creating a narrative to excuse your poor performance. These are timestamps and document histories, I replied. They're not a narrative. They're facts. The meeting ended with HR saying they needed time to review everything. I left the folder with them and walked out. Trent caught up with me in the hallway. You just made the biggest mistake of your career. I didn't respond. I simply walked away, my heart pounding but my head clear. That night, I received an email from Sharon requesting a follow-up meeting the next morning. When I arrived, only Sharon was there. Laurel, I've reviewed your documentation, she said. Some of what you've presented raises legitimate questions.
Hope flickered in my chest.
However, she continued, HR's role is to protect the company. And right now, pursuing an internal investigation would be complicated and potentially damaging to ongoing client relationships. The hope died. So you're not going to do anything. We're going to recommend that both you and Trent receive additional management training and communication coaching. I almost laughed. He's systematically building false cases against employees who question him, and your solution is communication coaching? Sharon looked uncomfortable. I understand your frustration, but these are complex workplace dynamics. I stood up. No, they're not. They're retaliation. And you're choosing to protect him because he makes the company money. I didn't wait for her response. I walked straight back to my desk, opened my laptop, and typed out my resignation letter. 2 weeks' notice, professional and brief. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. Then I started looking for new jobs. My resignation shocked everyone, especially Trent. He called me into his office within an hour. You're making a mistake, he said. You won't find another position in this industry after leaving under these circumstances. I'm not leaving under circumstances, I replied. I'm leaving by choice. People will ask why you left so suddenly. What will you tell them? I met his eyes. The truth. That I refused to compromise my professional ethics and found the work environment no longer aligned with my values. Something flickered in his expression. You think anyone will believe you over me? I think my work speaks for itself, I said. And I think you're more worried about this than you're letting on. I worked my 2 weeks quietly, transferring projects and documenting everything for whoever would replace me. On my last day, several coworkers stopped by with kind words and LinkedIn connection requests. Marcus hugged me. You're better than this place, he whispered. As I packed my desk, I felt lighter than I had in months. I was scared about what came next, but I was also free. I carried my box to my car and drove away without looking back. The next chapter of my life was about to begin, though I had no idea how perfectly it would align with justice. 3 weeks later, I started my new position at Sterling Compliance Partners, a boutique firm specializing in regulatory review and third-party approvals for corporate deals. The office was smaller, the team more tight-knit, and my new boss, Patricia Hammond, actually listened when I spoke. We hired you because of your reputation for thoroughness, Patricia said during my first week. In this business, accuracy matters more than speed. It was like breathing fresh air after years of holding my breath. My responsibilities involved reviewing corporate merger documents, verifying compliance with industry regulations, and providing official sign-offs for deals that required third-party approval. The work was detailed and demanding, but it was exactly what I was good at. I threw myself into learning Sterling systems and building relationships with my new team. Nobody here was trying to undermine me or take credit for my work. Nobody was cutting corners or pressuring me to approve questionable documentation. For the first time in years, I felt valued. I started sleeping better, stopped checking my email obsessively, and remembered why I'd chosen this career in the first place. Some nights, I thought about Trent and wondered if karma would ever catch up with him.
I didn't dwell on it, though.
I was too busy building something better. 6 weeks into my new job, Patricia dropped a thick file on my desk. New client acquisition proposal. Major merger in the consulting industry. They need regulatory sign-off from an approved third-party reviewer. I opened the file casually, scanning the cover page. Then I saw the name. Callahan Consulting Group. My heart stopped. I flipped through the documents with shaking hands. It was a merger deal worth millions, combining Callahan Consulting with another firm to expand their market reach. The deal required sign-off from an accredited compliance reviewer to verify that all regulatory requirements were met. And according to Sterling's client assignment system, that reviewer was me. I sat back in my chair, staring at the papers spread across my desk. The universe had just handed me the most poetic opportunity imaginable. Patricia appeared at my cubicle. "You okay? You look pale." "I used to work for this company," I said slowly. She raised her eyebrows. "Is that going to be a problem?" "No," I said, finding my voice. "No problem at all. I'll handle it exactly by the book." She nodded and walked away. I looked back at the file, my mind racing. This wasn't about revenge. This was about doing my job with the same integrity that had gotten me pushed out in the first place. And if that integrity happened to create problems for Trent, well, that was just professional consequence. I spent the next 2 days reviewing every page of the Callahan merger documents with meticulous care. What I found didn't surprise me, but it did disappoint me. The paperwork was sloppy. Dates didn't match across documents. Required certifications were missing or incomplete. Financial disclosures had gaps that would never pass regulatory scrutiny. Several sections referenced compliance verifications that hadn't actually been completed. It was exactly the kind of rushed, corner-cutting work I'd seen Trent push through at the firm. The difference was that now, he needed someone else's approval to make it official. And that someone was me. According to Sterling's protocols, I had to document every deficiency and request corrections before I could provide sign-off. It was standard procedure, nothing personal, just professional requirements. I drafted a formal deficiency report listing each issue with a specific regulation or requirement it violated. The list was 3 pages long. I submitted it through Sterling's official client portal, copying Patricia and our legal team. The report would go directly to Callahan Consulting's deal team. They would see my name on it. Trent would see my name on it. I felt a strange calm as I hit send. This wasn't about getting even. This was about holding everyone, including my former employer, to the same standards I'd always believed in. The response came within hours. An email to Patricia from someone at Callahan Consulting, marked urgent. Patricia forwarded it to me with a note. "They're requesting a call to discuss the deficiencies. Standard procedure. Let me know when you're available." I scheduled the call for the following afternoon, giving myself time to review everything again. When the video conference started, I recognized several faces. Victor from sales, looking annoyed. Sharon from HR, looking nervous. And Trent, sitting at the head of the table with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Laurel," he said, and I heard the tension in his voice. "This is unexpected." "Hello, Trent," I replied professionally. "I'm here to discuss the deficiency report." Victor jumped in. "We feel some of the items you flagged are overly technical. Surely we can find some flexibility here." "These aren't technical preferences," I said calmly. "They're regulatory requirements. Every item I've flagged is based on specific compliance standards that your merger documents need to meet." Trent leaned forward. "How long will corrections take to satisfy your concerns?" "That depends on how quickly you can provide the missing documentation and fix the errors." "And if we can't meet your timeline?" I met his eyes through the screen. "Then I can't provide approval. It's that simple." The silence that followed was thick with tension. I could see Trent calculating, trying to find an angle. "Perhaps we could escalate this to your supervisor," he suggested. "We have a tight timeline on this deal." "Patricia is already copied on all communications," I replied. "And she trusts my professional judgment on compliance matters." That was true. Patricia had made it clear from day one that her reviewers had full authority over their sign-off decisions. It was what made Sterling's approvals valuable to clients. Victor tried a different approach. We've worked with other compliance firms that were more, let's say, practical about these requirements. Then I'd suggest you work with one of those firms, I said simply. But since you've contracted with Sterling, you'll need to meet our standards. I watched Trent's jaw tighten. He knew I had him. The merger contract specifically required sign-off from Sterling because of our industry accreditation. They couldn't just switch to another firm without restarting the entire approval process, which would blow their timeline. We'll have corrections to you by end of week, Trent said finally, his voice tight. I look forward to reviewing them, I replied professionally. The call ended. I sat back in my chair, my heart pounding. Patricia knocked on my cubicle wall. That seemed tense. Former employer, I explained. But I'm handling it by the book. She nodded. That's exactly what I want to hear. The corrected documents arrived on Friday afternoon, just before close of business. I stayed late to review them, wanting to give the submission my full attention without distractions. What I found was worse than the original submission. In their rush to meet my deadline, they'd created new errors while fixing old ones. Dates had been changed, but not updated consistently across all documents. New certifications had been added, but some were from unaccredited providers. Financial disclosures had been expanded, but now they contradicted earlier statements in the filing. It was clear that multiple people had worked on different sections without coordinating with each other. The result was a patchwork of corrections that created more problems than they solved. I spent the weekend carefully documenting every new issue, every inconsistency, every incomplete correction. By Monday morning, I had another detailed deficiency report ready. This one was 4 pages long. I submitted it through the portal with a professional note. Please find attached an updated review of the submitted corrections. Unfortunately, several issues remain unresolved and some new discrepancies have been introduced. Please address all listed items before resubmission. I knew what this meant. The merger had a deadline. Every day of delay cost money and increased the risk of the deal falling apart. And I just sent them back to square one. My phone started ringing within the hour. The caller ID showed Trent's direct line. I didn't answer. He called 3 more times that morning. I let each call go to voicemail. The messages grew progressively more agitated. The first was professionally tense. The second was barely concealed frustration. The third was a demand that I call him back immediately to discuss this situation. I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I sent a brief email through the official portal. All communications regarding client submissions should go through Sterling's designated channels. Please direct any questions or concerns to our client services team. Patricia stopped by my desk that afternoon. The client is requesting to speak with me about your review, she said. That's fine, I replied. I'm happy to walk you through any of my findings. She pulled up a chair. Walk me through it now. I spent 30 minutes explaining each deficiency, showing her the regulatory requirements they violated, demonstrating the inconsistencies in the corrected documents. Patricia listened carefully, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When I finished, she nodded. Your analysis is solid. The work is substandard. They're rushing, I said, trying to meet a deadline instead of doing it right. She smiled slightly. And that's exactly why we exist. To make sure people do it right. She stood up and paused. I'll tell them what I tell every client who tries to pressure our reviewers. We trust our team's professional judgment, and we won't compromise our standards for anyone's timeline. The second round of corrections took them another week. This time, I could see evidence of external consultants being brought in. The documentation was more professional, more thorough, but it still had problems. Smaller problems, but problems nonetheless. I reviewed everything with the same meticulous attention I'd given the previous submissions. I found 3 remaining issues that needed to be addressed. All were legitimate compliance concerns, none were nitpicking. I prepared a 3rd deficiency report, this one just 1 page long, and submitted it. This time, the response wasn't from Trent. It was from the CEO of Callahan Consulting, Daniel Reeves, someone I'd met only twice during my entire time at the firm. His email to Patricia was formal and concerned. "We're approaching our merger deadline and need to understand what's required to gain approval from your team. This deal represents significant value to both companies involved, and we're committed to meeting all legitimate requirements." Patricia forwarded it to me. "Your call on how to respond." I drafted a straightforward reply. "The remaining deficiencies are clearly outlined in the most recent report. Once these specific items are addressed, I can proceed with final review and approval. Estimated timeline for final review following compliant resubmission, 48 hours. I was being completely fair. But fair didn't mean fast, and time was the one thing they didn't have. The final submission came in 72 hours before their merger deadline. I could feel the desperation in the formatting, the way every document was triple-checked, every reference properly cited, every requirement meticulously addressed. Someone, probably an expensive consulting firm, had gone through the entire package with extraordinary care. I reviewed it over 2 days, checking every correction against my previous notes, verifying every claim against source documentation, cross-referencing every date and figure. It was thorough work, the kind of work that should have been done correctly the first time. On the morning of day 2, I reached my conclusion. The submission was compliant. Every requirement had been met, every deficiency addressed, every standard satisfied. I could approve it. I sat at my desk with a final sign-off document open on my screen, my cursor hovering over the signature field. This was the moment. One signature, and Trent's merger would proceed. The deal would close, the company would grow, and he would continue his career without consequence. I thought about Nina Valdez, pushed out of the industry entirely. I thought about the other employees whose careers had been damaged by Trent's retaliation. I thought about the months of manipulation and manufactured complaints. But then I thought about something else. My integrity. The reason I'd refused to compromise in the first place. The reason I'd left rather than become like him. I signed the document. The approval went through official channels that afternoon. I attached a brief note. All deficiencies have been satisfactorily addressed. Final approval granted per Sterling Compliance Partners standards. Signed documentation attached. Patricia stopped by my desk. "Professional work," she said simply, even under what I imagine was considerable personal pressure. "It was just compliance review," I replied. Same as any other client. But we both knew that wasn't entirely true. That evening, I received an email from Marcus, my former coworker at Callahan. "I heard you were the reviewer on the merger. The whole office was freaking out when they saw your name on the deficiency reports. Trent looked like he was going to explode. But you approved it in the end?" I wrote back. "I did my job. The final submission met all requirements." "That must have been satisfying," he replied. "I thought about that. It should have felt like victory, like revenge served cold. But mostly, I just felt tired and ready to move on. The satisfaction wasn't in making Trent sweat, though that had certainly happened. The satisfaction was in knowing I'd handled everything with integrity. I'd held him to the same standards I held everyone else. No more, no less. If that process had been painful for him, well, that was what accountability felt like. 2 weeks later, Patricia called me into her office. "I wanted you to know that several companies have specifically requested you as their reviewer after hearing about your work on the Callahan merger." 6 months passed, and life at Sterling became everything I'd hoped my career could be. I was promoted to senior compliance officer, leading a team of 3 junior reviewers. My salary increased by 30%, and I actually used my vacation time without feeling guilty. The Callahan merger had closed successfully, and the combined company was doing well according to industry reports. I didn't follow their news closely. I was too busy building my own reputation. One afternoon, Patricia forwarded me an article from an industry publication. The headline read, "Callahan Consulting Faces Internal Investigation Following Compliance Concerns." The article detailed allegations of improper documentation practices and regulatory shortcuts that had surfaced during post-merger integration. Several employees had come forward with concerns about pressure to approve questionable client work. The company's board had launched an internal review. Trent Callahan's name appeared in the 3rd paragraph. He'd been placed on administrative leave, pending the investigation's outcome. I read the article twice, then closed my laptop. Marcus texted me that evening. Did you see the news? Trent's finally getting what he deserves. You must be celebrating. I wasn't celebrating. I was relieved. Relieved that the pattern had finally been exposed. Relieved that future employees wouldn't have to experience what I'd experienced. But mostly I felt validated. Everything I'd tried to raise concerns about, everything I'd been punished for questioning, was now being investigated by people who couldn't be intimidated or dismissed. The truth had a way of surfacing eventually. That weekend, I sat on my apartment balcony with a cup of coffee, watching the sunrise. My phone buzzed with a LinkedIn notification. Someone had endorsed me for professional ethics and compliance standards. I smiled. The most powerful form of revenge, I'd learned, wasn't sabotage or retaliation. It was simply refusing to compromise your integrity while the people who underestimated you destroyed themselves with their own poor choices. I'd done my job with fairness and professionalism, even when it would have been easy to let personal feelings interfere. And in the end, that decision had protected my reputation and my peace of mind more than any act of revenge could have. I finished my coffee, opened my laptop, and started reviewing the week's client submissions. There was work to be done, standards to uphold, and a career to continue building. The past was behind me. The future stretched ahead, full of possibility. And I'd earned every bit of it. Sometimes the best revenge is simply being excellent at your job while refusing to enable those who aren't. Eventually, their shortcuts catch up with them. You just have to be patient enough to let it happen. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What would you have done in such situation? Please share below and subscribe to this channel for more stories like mine.